Okay, well, welcome to this week's drop-in session. This is the first in January 2026, and we thought that we would kick off the new year with a relook at uh, implementing Spark within an organization. So I probably should have titled this slightly differently. I realized as I was putting this together that maybe the first 100 days of a Spark implementation would be a more appropriate title to this, because what I wanted to do in this session was just go through some of the sort of key things that any team starting this implementation journey, some of the key things that you really need to get done. So there's a lot more than what I'm going to go through here, but what we found is over many implementations of this kind, and we're talking specifically about Spark today, but a number of us in the team have done this with other platforms as well, and is always a very sort of similar set of things, concrete things that we need to do to kick off that implementation and get things going. The other thing that I want to do in this session is just highlight some of the resources that we've got available as well to help people going through this journey. So to help me just take you through the implementation, we have what we call the Spark implementation process available. This is available to you through the app share on the Netcall community. So again, a little bit of a plug for the Netcall community. If you're not already on there, the URL is community.netcall.com. The community includes forums. We have the Netcall Academy on there, which has some of the self-paced training materials for Spark and other tools in the Netcall platform. We've also got all of the user manuals in there, and this area called App Share, where you can download things like example processes or apps for some of the other tools in our platform. So as I said, there's a number of resources which I'm going to share today, including this one, which are available to you through the community. I will try to drop the links actually into the chat, so they'll be available, and try and make those available afterwards in the YouTube recording. So I guess one of the key things here is it's just this high level process is all about sort of the main bits that you need to set up and get working for a long-term implementation of Spark. And I think one thing that this probably perhaps doesn't convey as well as it could do is that there is generally a sort of a very high level, a sort of two-step approach to this. When you first implement the platform or a process library, there's a big phase which is all about getting processes documented and into the library so that they're available for people to be able to access and use. And then the second side of this is that ongoing maintenance of the library. So in reality, the adding of process documentation is almost like an ongoing thing, because you're always discovering new processes, new areas, or even you might be designing new areas of the organization that then needs processes. So there's generally always a sort of steady stream of new processes going into the library at the same time as maintaining and updating the content that's in there. So this is a little bit more focused on that implementation side, but there are some things in here that talk about that are sort of setting you up for the ongoing maintenance. Now, the bit that I'm going to focus around most of this is the define piece, because this is all about helping people. What are the things we need to do right at the beginning? But I'll just quickly go through this. One of the things that we do have in this implementation process is the defining the roadmap is all about planning and setting up the project. Then we go into what I would call the life cycle of the process, and I'll come back to that in a second. But it's like, how do we take a requirement to get a process documented all the way through to that having that available on the library and ready for people to use. So you can see we sort of talk about building the process content here, which is all about organizing the workshops, mapping the process, getting it signed off and that sort of thing. And then that moves into deploying the process content, which is then, okay, how do you make sure that it's ready for people to consume? How do you make sure they know how to find it? That sort of thing. The other bit on here, which hangs off this, is this bit around establishing and managing a center of excellence. So that is the sort of kind of first stages of setting yourself up for that ongoing management of the processes afterwards. And in reality, what goes on in there will change and grow over time. So at the very beginning of this of an implementation, this is really about just starting to understand who are the key people going to be involved, what are the processes we need to get into the system, and things like standards and best practice. Okay, so it's a high level view, and most of these boxes, as you can see, have got detailed views on them, so there's a little bit more in each one to help guide you. As I said, that is available on our template library, so I'm going to just take a copy of that, drop this into the chat if anyone wants it. You'll see there is, whenever you go into one of these templated processes, there's an option there where you can add a copy of that to your own workspace. Now, what's slightly different in mine, as I've added a bit more information into what we mean by defined roadmap. So these are the sort of key things, the key early steps that people really have to start at the beginning of their implementation. We do have a few notes on here, and again, this is very high level, but I think, again, it's really important that there is a sort of clear view of where you're trying to go with this. So when you're starting to build a process library, you've got to think about what is the long-term vision for this? What do we want in future? Because it becomes something that you can refer back to. I'm not going to go into it too much. I'm not going to go into any detail today, but we do have some material around building a center of excellence, and one of the pieces of that is in terms of defining a vision and strategy. We use tools like process maturity models, which help you think about, okay, where do we want to get to with this, when, in terms of reaching a point where we can do continuous improvement off the back of the processes we have in the library. But in the early days, you also have to be very, very clear about the goals and objectives. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve by getting this up and running in the sort of short to medium term, and having a clear project team and really an owner of that project as well. There's nothing worse than sort of picking something like this up, sending everybody on training, and then hoping that everything is people are just going to pick it up and start doing stuff with it. You do have to have more structure than that to make sure that you can make progress with it. So I'm going to go into a bit of detail on that. So a few notes around this. So some of this is about you're going back to that objectives and goals. So I think another key consideration here is about the primary use case of building or using a platform like Spark. Now, at a very high level, we tend to see teams split into sort of two very broad use cases, and one will often feed the other. So those use cases might be what I'm going to say is a transformation driven use case. So that is where the team is picking up and documenting processes in order to deliver a transformation program of some kind, typically digital transformation. So most of the focus is on often a scope of the business that is being transformed, the processes within that, and those that are likely to end up being digitized, automated, or improved in some way or another. Now, the reason that's slightly different is that although they will often have a sort of longer term view or a mission to maintain those processes for the long term, generally the focus of the initiative is we need to get the transformation delivered, and then we'll sort of worry about that afterwards. So that's one of the broad use cases. The other one is the very much the process library driven. So we tend to see that much more in sort of quality management and compliance situations, where actually the focus is we just need to get our processes documented and visible and available to people in a central location. So whichever of those two that you're on, there are some nuances in how you'd go about some of this. But at the point where you're setting goals and objectives, it's important to understand which of those that you're doing, because that will help drive things like how you track the progress through how you track your progress moving forward. So here I've put some kind of questions in this in terms of, is this a new standalone initiative, example building a process library, or is it aligned with something else? Because again, if it's aligned with an existing initiative like a transformation program, then essentially what you're trying to do is help ensure the delivery of that program, but you're bringing something extra to that. So what is it, and are you doing that, and how do you make sure that you continue to do that throughout that program? And it's also important, again, in this first 100 days to be sort of very clear about realistically what you can achieve 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months out. And you can think beyond that as well. But if you've just got something very vague like, oh, we're going to build a process library, each of those points you're going to get to, and it's like, it's always going to feel like we're really, really far away from that. So be quite clear and realistic about what you're going to try and achieve in those periods. Now, some of the other things I'm going to talk about a bit further down are going to help you to plan and do that, but you can start sort of putting this together. Next thing on there is a project team. I touched on that before, but again, making sure there is somebody who is dedicated to making sure that this is all moving forward. Now, if you've set up a proper project plan, you're going to have a project or program manager who's going to be able to oversee this and deliver the project. But again, going back to that point that I made before, which is not as unusual as it should be, which is where an organization will put a bunch of people on the training and hope that someone's going to pick it up and run with it. The problem with that is everyone thinks that someone else is doing it. And so that's why it's really important to have somebody who can take ownership and sort of help to push things forward, at least take ownership of that plan and make sure that it's being delivered. Some of the things that can make that challenging is that often you're going to be drawing on resources from different teams who are going to be reporting into different people. So again, as you put your plan together, it's about being realistic about how much time those people are going to be involved and dedicate to this type of work. But essentially what you're doing, especially in these early days, and I think this is regardless of which of those key use cases that you're looking at, is thinking about who are going to be the sort of long-term subject matter experts stroke champions for this, because you at the very beginning of this journey, there's a little bit of discovery, understanding how this works with your organization. There's going to be challenges that you're going to have to overcome, and if those people are involved in it, then over the long term, they're going to be key people who are going to help moving things forward, answering questions for people, and so on. So again, this is something to consider when you're thinking very early about who am I going to have in that key team, because if you're sort of focused initially on, we just need to get a bunch of processes in here and we're going to train a bunch of people up to do that, that's fine. But if once you've done that piece of the work and all of those people go back to their day job and then they're not involved anymore, you can almost sort of start to lose some of that knowledge that people have. So it's important to try and identify those kind of long-term SMEs are going to be. I know it's not always super easy, but if you can, it will really help. Right, and the next thing, which again is really, really valuable, and it doesn't have to be super complicated to do, is to basically create a list of all of the processes that could be in your library at some point in the future. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is going to change over time. I've called it here the process catalog, but it is literally just a list. How you go about building that list, there's lots of different ways of doing it. I was talking to somebody at the beginning of this week, and they were talking about how they had started with a process classification framework. So they'd gone online, looked for a process model for their industry. They'd taken that, then reviewed it with peers, and then worked out what were the things we do and things that aren't relevant to us. That's a great starting point. Gives you a list. If you do use one of those generic models like that, though, is do take the time to review it and make sure it's relevant to your business. Don't try to reverse engineer your processes into someone else's model, because it doesn't then accurately reflect your organization. The really important thing about a list is once you've got a list of processes, you can then prioritize them. So if you've got a plan, which are the ones that we're going to try and get in here in the next 6 or 12 months, then at least you've got a list of everything that you could be a sort of inventory that you can then work from. So it can help you prioritize, but it can also help you track progress. And then again, I was talking to somebody yesterday who said they keep a notebook because as they're working with different teams within their organization, they kept finding processes or identifying processes that no one knew even existed before. And so they made this little list in this notebook, and sometimes they'd go back, or someone would say, we've got a challenge over here, and they could refer to this and go, oh, that's related to that particular process. So getting that somewhere centrally, even if it's in a spreadsheet, it will really help. And the other thing you can start to do with that is start to build out other information around it as well. So you might look, capture things like to help you with that planning, capture things like your scope of the process, who the process owner is, those sorts of things. Because when you then start to have to go out and capture that information, if the more you've got early on, the better. So that to me is in that first 100 days and as early as possible is really, really important to get. As I said, it doesn't have to be perfect because it will change over time. As you start to document processes, you'll realize some that you've identified on the list are actually part of others, or you'll identify new processes. So it's a kind of dynamic thing that changes time, but it helps you with that tracking progress. Now, another thing that I think is quite important to do, and this is one of those things that can change based on the use case. So whether it's sort of that change driven or library driven use case, is this process lifecycle. What do I mean by the process lifecycle? I touched on it before on the top level, but it's basically we've got a requirement to document a process. So obviously if that's library driven, then what we've done is we've prioritized all our key processes and then said which are the ones we're going to map. So it's when the next one's available on the list, all the way through to that being available for people to use. Now, the reason those are slightly different is because the focus of what you're doing might be different. If your goal in the library use case is we just need to get standardized processes into the library in the first phase, then your life cycle is going to be slightly different than those who are going out to do digital transformation, who are specifically looking at what can we digitize in this process and what are the requirements for that going to be. So what I suggest people do in this, and we will often help teams facilitate this, is to map that process out. So I go back to my implementation process. That's essentially what we've done here with the build process content and deploy process content. So again, if you take a copy of this, you've got this available for you. Also within the app share process library, we also have one that's more around the that change first type approach. We call it the process change approach. And this is about getting those subject matter experts together, map this process out, discuss what it is they need to do at each step, like right down into the capture as is process. Again, this, hopefully most of this will be obvious, but when you get to things like mapping the process, what concretely do you need to capture? Well, it's actually this one, capture additional information. So beyond just mapping the process, what specifically do you need to capture? Once you've captured the process, what are you going to do next to it? Analyze it to identify opportunities for improvement. So it's really important. That's a really useful exercise, sorry, to go through, because again, once you're working through that list of processes, again, get them in the library, you can also say, okay, where have we got to in the particular life cycle of the process? Again, I will drop this into the chat there so that you've got it. If anyone wants a copy of it, they can have that too. So the last bit that I just want to touch on then is that training and support. So again, those of you working with us and using the onboarding services that we provide. So the onboarding tends to be, if not tends to be, is a more of a sort of coaching based approach. So we have self-paced materials that are available. So we've got the academy that's available through the Netcall community. Another thing that we also now by default we will drop into new workspaces for new teams starting out is this getting started with Spark process. This just has links to all sorts of useful information. We've got various videos showing different features and functionality. We've got linked directly to the self-paced training, various other things like the drop-ins in the community and so on. So again, another useful resource for teams starting out, because it's a good place, especially for process editors, to go and reference and pick up some of that information. Again, that's available if you don't already have it to drop into your workspace. And then what we do alongside that is to, with our onboarding services, it's more of a sort of coaching based approach where what we want to see you do is start to work on some of those processes, start getting them documented, and then we help guide you to make sure that you're getting the most out of Spark and using it in the most effective way to do that. And I think the last thing I just wanted to touch on here, which is really important, is I mentioned community right at the bottom here. So I'm not just talking about the Netcall community, but I think it's really important, especially if you identify those key subject matter experts early on. It's really important to build an internal community of users for Spark. And they might not be just editors, they could be kind of champions around the organization for a process-based approach, but try to get them together at regular intervals, once a month or whatever, get them talking about different things, challenges they've done. Essentially what a community is really good for is reminding people about things they might have forgotten about, like key things they can do and benefits of having a process-led approach. But it also helps with kind of general education, so people can learn stuff they didn't know about. If someone identifies a new or better way of doing something and then shares it back with the group, it's just a great way of helping people to encourage each other and to keep following the standards and so on. So I suppose the other thing I didn't mention, sorry, I've just said it, is standards. It was I had it sat under the process life cycle, but also try and agree some standards. Again, keep that very, very simple. We also have a very simple standards template which you can take and adjust or modify for your own use in there as well. So as I said, in those first few days, you're going to be spending a lot of time mapping processes, but before you start mapping out any processes, make sure you understand what you're trying to achieve, make sure you've got a team to help you do it, build a list of processes that you can work from, doesn't have to be perfect. Outline what the life cycle of the process is. So when you say you're going to map a process, what do you actually mean? There's often more to it than that. And obviously take advantage of any of the training and support materials that are available.